So the next poem I'm going to be talking about is Checking Out My History. So the first quote I picked is Them Tell Me, which is spelled phonetically, which instantly shows Agard's identity. And then he says, what them want to tell me, which shows him talking about British society, engineering history to favour them, and manipulating it. And this is repeated at the end of the poem, which emphasises his anger and the situation. Agard then says, bandage up my eye, which is quite ironic, since bandages should be used for healing, but here it's used in a negative way. And he also says, blind me, which again is quite aggressive, and the plosive B from the blind and the bandage shows how frustrated Agard is with the situation and how he's being covered from seeing Black history. And then he says, it's hard to say about putting an accent, he says, then tell me about the man who discovered the balloon, which kind of, the dismissive language here shows how he's dismissing English history because he's assuming the reader already knows it because we've been taught it so much. And also, it's quite trivial, the story that he's talking about, and the simple rhymes emphasise this, so moon and spoon, and it kind of indicates the silliness of British history and what we're being taught when we could be being taught more serious Black history, which means more. And also the fact that Agard's talking about nursery rhymes from Britain shows the tradition of reading poetry out loud, which is quite a nice context since Agard's poem is meant to be read out loud, which is why it's written phonetically. And then at the end he says, I carving out my identity. And also this is significant because he's changed the pronoun to I, so now it shows how he's taking control of his situation. And the verb carving suggests how it's going to take time and a lot of energy for Agard to find his identity and learn about where he comes from, and yeah. But the verb shows how it would be worth it for him because he'll put in the effort, he'll put in the time, and it'll be worth it for him because the end product of him knowing where he's from will be beautiful. And also earlier in the poem, he says, then tell me about Columbus, and then what happened to the Caribs? Look at it in the anthology, you can see how it's written. But anyway, he's talking about how Columbus wasn't actually the first to discover America, which is an example of history being favoured and being altered by us. And also it shows the flip side and the bad side to history, since we celebrate Columbus discovering America. But he's talking about how they actually killed and forced Native Americans into slavery, which again reminds us how there's more than one version of history, and what we're taught might not be the way it's taught elsewhere and might not actually be the true picture. A key theme in this poem is the power of humans, as we see Agard being annoyed at those who are in charge of education as they give us a one-sided view of history. And then he also uses metaphors of blindness, as we saw, which shows how Agard feels like he's been badly treated. And then he also refers to real historical misuses of power and about Black people who revolted against slavery, which he feels is an important part of history that should be taught more frequently, especially in Britain. And then also there's a theme of anger, as he repeats them tell me a lot, which kind of sets himself in opposition to society. He's going against Britain and what we teach. And also he avoids using British grammar by writing phonetically, which distances himself from the society that he's criticising. And then he juxtaposes British nursery rhymes to Caribbean heroes. So he compares like Moon and Spoon to Nanny D. Maroon, which kind of, it looks ridiculous that he's comparing such insignificant nursery rhymes to such important people, which is kind of the point to make us feel like, oh, we're teaching about this, but we should be teaching about this instead. And also the theme of identity is important in this poem, as Agard feels like his British national identity is trying to mould him and change him, but he wants to stick to his roots and he wants to learn more about his identity and where he comes from, which he seems to be struggling with throughout this poem. But also the poem ends in a more positive note, and with Agard's assertion, he's saying carving out my identity, which is quite forceful again. And carving, like we were talking about, it suggests a continuous, difficult process, but with permanent results where Agag will be able to find his identity and understand where he comes from. Structurally, the rhymes that Agag uses are quite significant. So firstly, just rhyming such trivial British stories to important black figures. And then also, if you notice, if you're looking at anthology, when he does this rhyming thing, he always ends with the black figure rhyme last, which structurally shows they're the most important. And also the lack of punctuation in this poem makes it deliberately difficult to read out loud, which is Agag trying to reflect his difficulties of having a different culture forced upon him in Britain. That's quite an abstract point there, but I don't know, I think that's quite cool, so I like to include that. And also there's a mixture of stanza lengths to separate the black and the white history, and we see the British stanzas to have more simple, long lines, and the Caribbean stanzas are in shorter stanzas, which again emphasises their importance. Pre-warning, the quotes for London are not in order, so please have your anthology with you if you're doing this proactively, so you can find the quotes in the anthology, know where they come from, and then if you want you can write annotations there. So the first quote I picked is "Every blackening church appalls," which shows how the church is corrupt and tarnished by its failure to help people, and also shows how the church is appalled in itself because the people working there and the church metaphorically wants to help people but can't because the problems are just too great. And then Blake says, "Runs in blood down the palace walls," which is a reference to the French Revolution and just shows how corrupt power and high authorities are. And then he says, "The youthful harlot's curse and newborn infant's tear," which has more than one meaning, arguably. So the first quote just is him saying that prostitutes are swearing, and this reflects the bad life that they've had, and like it's not necessarily their fault, they've just had poor life chances. But then you can say maybe they're being cursed by society instead, or they're cursing the newborns to the same fate of growing up having a not so great life. And generally this creates quite a noisy, unpleasant impression of London at the time. Blakeson says "in every cry and in every voice," which is anaphora and represents a hellish experience of being in London at this time. And he also repeats the word "chartered," which shows how the government owns everything and they have all power and all authority in this society. And then he says "marks of weakness, marks of woe," which again is repetition and emphasises how everyone is affected by this poverty and there's no relief from it. And it also recognises a collective society in London where everybody is suffering together. And he also says "mind-forged manacles," which shows how the people are trapped in poverty and it's an endless cycle. And also they're illiterate, you can probably assume, and so they're almost stopping themselves getting out of this poverty trap. And so people are controlled by their own limitations in this society, and so it puts them in a kind of prison which they can't escape from. Key themes in this poem are hopelessness, as there's an absence of anything positive in this poem, and an absence of freedom, an absence of innocence and morality. And also it's a cyclical structure, and so it shows nothing will ever change as the poem can keep going on and on in a full cycle. And also there's a theme of anger, as Blake is angry about the society he's seeing, and he uses emotive imagery to share this anger as he criticises big establishments such as the church and the government. And also this poem is an individual experience as it opens with I, so we instantly see it's a dramatic monologue and it describes his walk through London. However, Blake is almost removed from the suffering, so kind of like he's describing it from a bigger picture and he stepped back so he can observe this bigger picture and criticise these big institutions. The form of this poem is a dramatic monologue which allows Blake to emphasise his angry message describing the state of London society at this time and the corrupt institutions. And also it's a cyclical structure as it starts with Blake wandering and it ends the same way, so you can imagine it continuing, and this shows the inescapable suffering of people's lives in London at this time. So 2 poems I think are good to compare are London and Checking Out My History, again depending on the question you are given, because you can talk about how they both criticise those in power As checking out my history repeats them tell me, which shows how he's frustrated by the education system and what they teach. And also the blindness imagery further emphasises his frustration. And then in London we can see the description of every blackening church appalled and the repetition of chartered, which shows how Blake is just annoyed by these big institutions not helping and possibly further emphasising the poverty and the trapped cycle that people are suffering in London at the time, which again is emphasised through a dramatic monologue. But then you can see how London doesn't offer a solution since it's a cyclical cycle, so it shows nothing changes and nothing ever will change and gives a sense of hopelessness. However, with checking out the history, there's actually a kind of solution at the end, as Agard decides he wants to carve out his own identity and he's going to be proactive and take a step forward with that. And also, checking out the history is oral poetry, so it's meant to be heard, it's meant to be read out loud, which shows how Agard wants people to remember his poem and hopefully inspire them to want to find out where they come from and want to know their roots. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and if you've got any other videos you want me to do, please leave a comment down below. In Ozymandias, it's a sonnet which Bye! Where are you going? Times like that, I think it's quite cool. I'm tired.